Some walls are built with brick and mortar, others are built with silence and distance. Thomas had mastered the art of both, turning his grand estate into a fortress where emotions were unwelcome guests. But when a woman with steady hands and an unguarded heart arrived to organize his household, she brought something he had long forgotten, the dangerous possibility of feeling alive again. What happens when a man who has chosen solitude meets a woman who refuses to be invisible? When duty collides with desire and propriety battles with a longing that grows stronger with each stolen glance. This is a story of two souls learning that the heart, once awakened, cannot be silenced. If stories like this move you, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from, and leave a like if you believe love can break through even the coldest defenses. Your support means the world. Now let us step into Riverside Hall, where everything is about to change. The morning light at Riverside Hall arrived with a particular kind of softness, filtering through magnolia branches and settling across the long porch like fine silk. The mansion stood proud against the Virginia landscape, its whitewashed columns reflecting the early sun, its azalea gardens blooming in orderly rows that spoke of careful tending and rigid expectations. Beyond the manicured lawns, the James River moved with slow certainty, carrying logs downstream toward the mills that had made the Ashford name both respected and envied throughout the county. Thomas Ashford stood in his office, ledger open before him, his pen moving across the page with the same measured precision he applied to every aspect of his life. At 38, he possessed the bearing of a man who had learned early that control was survival, that emotions were luxuries he could not afford. His dark hair, touched with grey at the temples, was neatly combed. His jacket fit perfectly across broad shoulders that had once swung axes alongside his workers, but now carried the weight of managing an empire built on pine and profit. The numbers pleased him. The timber contracts were solid, the railway shipments on schedule, the workforce stable, everything as it should be, everything predictable. A knock interrupted his morning ritual. "Come in," he said, not lifting his gaze from the columns of figures. The door opened to admit Joseph, his foreman, a weathered man whose hands bore the scars of 3 decades in the lumber trade. "Morning, sir. The North crew is ready for inspection. Weather is holding, so we can push the load through by noon if you approve the count." Thomas finally looked up, his grey eyes sharp and assessing. "The count matches the contract terms. Down to the last board, sir. I checked it myself twice, then proceed. Have the manifests ready for my signature before the train departs." Joseph nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. "If I may, sir, Mrs. Pembroke mentioned you approved hiring for the household position. The new girl arrives today." Thomas felt a flicker of something, not quite irritation, but close, at the reminder that his home required the same attention as his business. "Mrs. Pembroke handles domestic affairs. If she is satisfied with the candidate, that is sufficient." "Yes, sir." Joseph withdrew, closing the door with the quiet respect Thomas had come to expect from everyone in his employ. Alone again, Thomas returned to his ledger, but the numbers blurred slightly. He had not wanted to hire anyone new. The household ran efficiently under Mrs. Pembroke's stern governance, and additional staff meant additional presence, additional voices in rooms he preferred, kept still and ordered. His home was not meant to be lively, it was meant to be managed. He had learned that lesson 10 years ago, when fever had taken his younger sister Caroline, leaving the halls of Riverside Hall echoing with an absence that still woke him some nights. After her death he had made a choice, to build walls so high that loss could never scale them again. Work became his language, distance became his shield. The house, for all its beauty, was a monument to that decision, immaculate, impressive, and utterly cold. By mid-morning, Thomas had completed his rounds of the timber yard. He watched as workers loaded massive pine logs onto rail cars, their movements synchronized through years of practice. He corrected a foreman on the stacking method, approved a shipment schedule, and settled a minor dispute between 2 sawyers with the kind of quiet authority that left no room for argument. The men respected him, some even liked him, but none would claim to know him. The sun climbed higher, warming the air until it carried the thick sweetness of pine sap and river clay. Thomas returned to the house through the garden entrance, removing his hat as he stepped into the cool shade of the side corridor. The polished floors gleamed, Every surface was dust-free, every curtain hung with geometric perfection. This was how he needed things: ordered, controlled, predictable. He heard voices from the front of the house, Mrs. Pembroke's clipped tones giving instructions. The new hire had arrived then. Thomas felt no curiosity about her. Staff came and went. As long as they performed their duties and respected boundaries, he had no need to know more. He moved toward his office, intending to review the afternoon correspondence, when a sound stopped him. Footsteps, light but purposeful, crossing the entrance hall. Then Mrs. Pembroke's voice, firm as iron, wrapped in velvet: "You will maintain the household inventory, assist with correspondence, and ensure the silver and linens are kept to standard. Riverside Hall has a reputation, Miss Brennan, and I expect you to uphold it. Discretion is essential, do you understand?" A pause. Then a voice Thomas had not heard before, clear, steady, touched with neither servility nor arrogance. "I understand completely, Mrs. Pembroke. You will find I take my responsibilities seriously." Something in that voice made Thomas stop just outside the doorway to his office. It was not the words themselves, but the quality beneath them. Dignity, intelligence, strength held in reserve. He found himself turning, drawn by an instinct he did not recognize, and caught a glimpse through the partially open door. She stood in profile, her posture straight without being stiff. She wore a simple dress in blue-gray, practical and well-made, but showing the small signs of careful mending at the cuffs. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat coil, revealing a face with clear features and eyes that met Mrs. Pembroke's gaze directly. She was neither beautiful in the conventional sense nor plain, something more interesting than either. There was a quietness about her, but it was not the quietness of submission. It was the quietness of someone who had learned to hold their own counsel. Thomas felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, as if the air in the corridor had suddenly thinned. He told himself it was merely surprise at seeing someone so composed in Mrs. Pembroke's presence. The housekeeper had reduced more than one maid to trembling apologies. "Very well," Mrs. Pembroke said. "I will show you to your quarters. You will begin your duties this afternoon after you have settled. And Miss Brennan, one more thing." "Yes, ma'am." "The master of this house values his privacy above all else. You will perform your work efficiently and without unnecessary interaction." "Is that clear?" Again that steady voice. Perfectly clear. Thomas stepped back into the shadow of the corridor as Mrs. Pembroke led the new secretary toward the servants' staircase. He caught one more glimpse of the woman, Elizabeth Brennan he now knew, as she passed. For a fraction of a second her gaze swept the hallway, and though she could not have seen him in the dimness, Thomas felt the weight of it, like a hand pressed against his sternum. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading up the stairs. Thomas stood alone in the corridor, the ledger in his hand forgotten. The house settled back into its customary silence, but something had shifted, some infinitesimal change in the air that he could not name. He told himself it meant nothing. She was staff. She would perform her duties. The order of his life would remain intact. He returned to his office and tried to focus on the afternoon's work. But the numbers on the page kept blurring, replaced by the memory of a voice that spoke with quiet strength, and eyes that did not look away. Outside, the river continued its steady flow. Inside Riverside Hall, something had begun to move that Thomas Ashford, for all his careful control, had not anticipated and could not stop. Elizabeth Brennan stood in the small room that would be hers, her worn traveling bag resting on the narrow bed. The space was clean and adequate, with a single window overlooking the kitchen garden and a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin. She had lived in smaller quarters, slept in colder rooms. This would do. She unpacked methodically, folding her few dresses into the chest of drawers, arranging her brush and pins on the washstand. Her fingers lingered on a small wooden box at the bottom of her bag. Inside lay her brother's last letter from Richmond, the paper soft from repeated reading. Samuel was 17, bright as morning, and dying slowly from the lung disease that had already taken their mother. The sanatorium offered hope, but hope came with a price Elizabeth could barely meet, even with this position. She closed the box and placed it in the drawer beneath her nightgown. There was no room for sentiment during working hours. Mrs. Pembroke had made the expectations clear: precision, discretion, and distance. Elizabeth understood hierarchies. She had been raised by a seamstress who taught her that dignity was not a privilege of class but a choice of character. She would do her work well, save every penny possible, and when the time came to leave, she would do so with her head high. A bell chimed somewhere below. Mrs. Pembroke's voice carried up the narrow stairwell. "Miss Brennan, you may begin." Elizabeth smoothed her dress, checked that her hair remained securely pinned, and descended to the main floor. The transition from the servants' quarters to the formal rooms of Riverside Hall was stark. Here everything gleamed. The floors were polished to a mirror shine. The scent of beeswax and pine soap hung in the air, clean and astringent. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced men and elegant women whose eyes seemed to follow her as she walked. Mrs. Pembroke waited in what she called the morning room, though the afternoon sun now slanted through tall windows. The housekeeper was a woman of perhaps 55, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her black dress immaculate. She gestured to a desk near the window. "You will work here when managing correspondence and inventory. The household ledgers are kept current. I expect you to maintain that standard." She opened a large leather-bound book, its pages filled with neat columns of entries. Every item in this house is accounted for. Silver, linens, preserves, candles. Nothing is overlooked. Elizabeth studied the ledger, noting the meticulous handwriting, the absence of errors. "I understand. What are the priorities for this week?" "The autumn inventory must be completed before the first frost. Additionally, Mr. Ashford received substantial correspondence related to his business interests. You will organize these by urgency and prepare summaries for his review. Does Mr. Ashford dictate responses, or shall I draft them for his approval?" "Mrs." Pembroke's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Ashford will inform you of his preferences when necessary. Otherwise, you will follow my direction. He is a man of significant responsibilities and limited patience for household matters." "Of course." Elizabeth kept her voice neutral, though she registered the warning beneath the words. The master of Riverside Hall was not to be approached, questioned or acknowledged unless absolutely necessary. "Mrs." Pembroke led her through the house, pointing out the linen closets, the silver pantry, the various receiving rooms that required weekly inspection. Elizabeth absorbed it all, asking occasional questions that demonstrated attention without challenging authority. She had learned long ago that the trick to surviving in service was to be valuable without becoming visible. They passed the library, and Elizabeth caught a glimpse of floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather spines catching the light. Her fingers itched to explore those volumes, but she kept her hands folded and her gaze forward. "The master's private study is beyond that door," Mrs. Pembroke said, gesturing to a closed entrance at the end of the hallway. "You will not enter unless specifically summoned. His correspondence will be left on the hall table each morning, and you will return your work there each evening." "Understood." "Very well. You may begin with today's delivery." "Mrs." Pembroke produced a stack of envelopes and papers tied with string. "These arrived this morning with the rail post. Some are delayed from last week's disruption on the line. Sort them by date and subject, then prepare a brief notation of contents where appropriate." Elizabeth accepted the bundle and returned to the morning room desk. She untied the string and began her work, grateful to have a clear task to focus on. The letters ranged from business contracts to social invitations, requests for meetings, to reports from timber managers in distant counties. She organized them chronologically first, then by category, her pen moving steadily as she noted key details on a separate sheet. She was halfway through when footsteps approached from the hallway. Elizabeth did not look up, but every nerve in her body suddenly registered a presence in the doorway. The air itself seemed to shift, growing heavier. "You are the new secretary." The voice was deep, measured, neither warm nor cold. Elizabeth set down her pen and rose, turning to face Thomas Ashford properly for the first time. He stood with one hand resting on the doorframe, his tall frame filling the space. In the afternoon light, she could see the sharp lines of his face, the grey eyes that assessed her with the same careful attention he likely gave his ledgers. There was strength in his bearing, but also something held tightly in check as if he existed in a state of perpetual restraint. "Yes, sir." "Elizabeth Brennan." His gaze moved to the papers on her desk, then back to her face. "Mrs. Pembroke has explained your duties." She has, sir. A pause. Then, you are managing the delayed correspondence. It was not quite a question, but Elizabeth answered anyway. Yes, sir. The railway disruption caused a week's delay. I am organizing by date and priority. And you have determined priority how? By the nature of the content. Contract deadlines take precedence, followed by time-sensitive business inquiries, then social correspondence. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. He stepped into the room, moving to the desk with quiet authority. May I? Elizabeth stepped aside, allowing him access to her work. He scanned the papers quickly, his fingers brushing the edge of her notes. His hands were strong, marked with small scars that spoke of work beyond merely signing documents. This notation, he said, pointing to one of her entries. You marked it urgent, but the meeting date has passed. Elizabeth leaned in slightly, close enough to see what he indicated, far enough to maintain propriety. The date was listed incorrectly by the sender, sir. If you examine the context of the letter, they reference next month's timber auction in Charleston. I believe they transposed the month in error. Thomas read the letter again, more slowly this time. When he looked up, their eyes met, and Elizabeth felt a strange jolt, as if she had touched something unexpectedly hot. For a moment, neither spoke. The room filled with the sound of the clock ticking on the mantel and the distant call of a bird beyond the window. You are correct, he said finally. The error is the sender's, not yours. Shall I draft a clarifying response? Yes. Brief and direct. Have it ready for my signature this evening. Of course, sir. He stepped back, creating distance again, but his gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked down at the papers, using the motion to steady herself. Mrs. Pembroke chose well, he said, and there was something in his tone she could not quite identify. Continue with your work, Miss Brennan. Thank you, sir. He turned and left the room, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Elizabeth remained standing by the desk, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself it was simply nervousness at meeting her employer, the natural anxiety of wanting to perform well, nothing more. But when she returned to her chair and picked up her pen, she found her hand was trembling slightly. She set the pen down and flexed her fingers, annoyed at herself. This was a position, nothing more. He was her employer, nothing more. Still, as she resumed her work, she could not shake the memory of his eyes. Not cold as she had expected, but watchful, intelligent, and carrying some weight she did not yet understand. Outside, the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. In the kitchen, she could hear the cook preparing supper. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. Riverside Hall continued its well-ordered existence, everything in its place. But Elizabeth Brennan sat at her desk and felt, for reasons she could not name, that something in this house was holding its breath. The week passed in careful rhythm. Elizabeth rose before dawn, attended to her morning duties, managed correspondence with quiet efficiency, and retreated to her small room each evening. She learned the patterns of Riverside Hall, the sound of Thomas's boots on the stairs at precisely 6:30 each morning, the rustle of newspapers delivered with breakfast, the way Mrs. Pembroke inspected the silver every Wednesday with the concentration of a general reviewing troops. She learned, too, to sense when Thomas was near without seeing him. There was something in the quality of silence that changed when he entered a room, a shift in air pressure that made her spine straighten and her awareness sharpen. He did not seek her out. Their interactions remained brief and professional. A question about a contract, approval of a letter she had drafted, occasional corrections delivered in that measured voice that revealed nothing. Yet Elizabeth noticed things, the way his gaze would linger on her handwriting, the almost imperceptible pause before he spoke to her, the manner in which he stood just slightly closer than necessary when reviewing her work. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself it meant nothing. On Thursday afternoon, storm clouds gathered over the river, turning the sky the color of old pewter. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against the windows of the glass-enclosed gallery, where Elizabeth had been cataloguing the contents of several trunks that had arrived from a deceased aunt's estate. Mrs. Pembroke had assigned her the task of sorting through linens, correspondence, and various household items to determine what should be kept or discarded. Elizabeth worked methodically, making notes in her ledger, folding yellowed lace carefully, setting aside letters that might hold family significance. The gallery offered a view of the river, now churning darkly under the approaching weather. She could hear the wind beginning to rise, rattling the glass panes. She was examining a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon when footsteps approached. She knew without turning that it was Thomas. "The post from Charleston arrived," he said. There was an issue with the timber specifications. Elizabeth set down the letters and turned. He stood in the doorway holding several documents, his expression unreadable. "What kind of issue, sir?" "They claim the measurements differ from what was agreed." He moved into the gallery, spreading the papers on a small writing table near the window. According to their report, the boards are 3/4 of an inch short of specification across the entire shipment. Elizabeth approached the table, studying the documents. She had organized the original contract correspondence 2 weeks prior and remembered the details. "May I see the original agreement?" Thomas retrieved it from the portfolio he carried. Elizabeth read through both documents carefully, her finger tracing the relevant passages. After a moment, she looked up. "The error is not in the shipment, sir. It is in their interpretation of the contract. The original specifications list measurements in board feet, not linear dimensions. The Charleston office has confused the unit of measurement." Thomas leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. Elizabeth became acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of pine and soap, the warmth radiating from him. She forced herself to focus on the text. "Here," she said, pointing to a clause. "The contract specifies board feet calculated at standard thickness. Their receiving clerk appears to have measured linear feet instead." Thomas was silent for a long moment, studying the documents. Elizabeth could feel his breath, steady and warm, near her temple. Then he straightened slightly, and she felt the loss of that heat like a door closing. "You are quite certain of this?" "Yes, sir, the mathematics confirm it. If you wish, I can draft a clarification explaining the measurement standards." "Do so. Include references to the original contract terms." He gathered the papers, but his movements were slower than usual, deliberate. "You have a keen eye for detail, Miss Brennan. I was trained to it, sir. My mother was a seamstress." Precision was not optional. For the first time since she had arrived at Riverside Hall, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "My sister used to say the same thing. She believed accuracy was a form of respect." The mention of a sister surprised Elizabeth. Mrs. Pembroke had never spoken of any family beyond Thomas himself. Was she also in the lumber trade? The softening vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No. She passed away some years ago." "I am sorry, sir." A curt nod. "The draft response should be ready by this evening." He turned to leave, but Elizabeth, emboldened by some instinct she did not fully understand, spoke again. "Sir, if I may." He stopped, half turning. "Yes?" The date notation on the Charleston contract. It was marked as received on the 15th, but the rail schedule shows no deliveries that day due to track maintenance. I believe someone backdated the receipt, possibly to avoid penalty fees for processing delays. Thomas turned fully now, his grey eyes sharp with attention. "You believe they are attempting fraud?" "I believe they made an error in measurement, panicked, and are now trying to shift blame to avoid consequences. The backdating suggests they know the mistake is theirs." Silence stretched between them. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to spatter against the gallery windows. The light dimmed, making the space feel suddenly intimate, enclosed. "That is a serious accusation, Miss Brennan. It is an observation, sir. What you do with it is your decision." His expression was unreadable, but Elizabeth sensed something moving beneath that controlled surface. Consideration, perhaps, or a reassessment of assumptions. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass roof. "You are either remarkably astute," he said slowly, "or remarkably presumptuous." Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "I am thorough, sir. You employ me to manage details. I am managing them." A flash of something crossed his face, anger, or possibly amusement. It was gone before she could name it. "The line between those qualities is thin, Miss Brennan. Take care which side you favor. I favor accuracy, sir. I assumed you did as well." The words came out more sharply than she intended, and Elizabeth immediately regretted them. She had overstepped. Mrs. Pembroke's warnings about discretion and distance echoed in her mind. She waited for dismissal, for rebuke. Instead, Thomas moved closer, stopping just near enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact. When he spoke, his voice was low, carrying an edge she had not heard before. "I do favor accuracy, Miss Brennan. In measurements, in contracts, and in understanding the people I employ. So let me be accurate with you. You are intelligent, capable, and far too confident for a woman in your position. That combination is either an asset or a liability. I have not yet determined which." Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not look away. "And what will determine that, sir? Whether you can balance that intelligence with appropriate discretion." They stood facing each other, the storm building outside, the gallery growing darker. Rain lashed the windows. Somewhere in the house, a door banged shut. Neither moved. Then Thomas stepped back, creating space again, restoring the proper distance between employer and employee. "Prepare the draft response, include the evidence regarding the backdating. I will decide how to proceed, yes, sir." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And Miss Brennan, sir, in the future, if you notice irregularities, you will report them to me directly. Not to Mrs. Pembroke, not to anyone else. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." He left without another word. Elizabeth stood alone in the gallery, the rain now falling in sheets, her pulse still racing. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath her palm. What had just happened? It had been a professional exchange, nothing more. Appropriate discussion of business matters. Yet it had felt like something else entirely. A challenge issued and accepted. Boundaries tested on both sides. Some invisible line crossed that neither of them had fully intended. Lightning flashed, illuminating the river and the storm-bent trees. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the glass panes. Elizabeth returned to her work table, but her hands were unsteady as she picked up her pen. She had come to Riverside Hall to do a job, to earn money for her brother's care, to survive. She had not come to engage in verbal sparring with a man whose control was so absolute it made her want to find the cracks in his armor. She had not come to feel her heart race at the sound of footsteps, or to notice the way grey eyes could burn cold and hot in the same moment. But as she began drafting the letter to Charleston, carefully documenting the measurement errors and the suspicious timing, she could not deny the truth. Something had shifted between them in this storm-darkened gallery, something that felt dangerous and inevitable in equal measure. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside Riverside Hall, Elizabeth Brennan bent over her work and pretended not to notice that her neat handwriting had developed an almost imperceptible tremor. The following Saturday brought news that rippled through Riverside Hall like wind through wheat. The annual county fundraising ball would be held at St. Michael's Church Hall, and Thomas Ashford was expected to attend. Mrs. Pembroke delivered this information to Elizabeth with the practicality of someone assigning any other household task. "You will accompany me to assist with the donations table," she said, inspecting Elizabeth's Sunday dress with a critical eye. "We will inventory contributions, record donor names, and ensure proper acknowledgement. You will conduct yourself with absolute propriety. The eyes of the county will be watching." Elizabeth understood what went unspoken. She would be present but invisible, helpful but unremarked upon. It was the delicate position of those who served, to facilitate society's functions while remaining outside its circles. The day of the ball arrived cool and clear, autumn asserting itself with bronze light and the scent of wood smoke. Elizabeth dressed in her best gown, a deep green dress her mother had made 3 years prior, simple but well cut, with careful stitching at the collar and cuffs. She pinned her hair more elaborately than usual, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face, then immediately questioned the vanity of it. She was going to work, not to socialize. Yet as she fastened her mother's small silver brooch at her throat, she could not deny the flutter of anticipation in her chest. The church hall had been transformed. Lamplight cast golden pools across polished floors. Garlands of autumn leaves and white ribbons decorated the walls. A small ensemble of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner, while long tables displayed donated pies, preserves, and needlework to be auctioned for the church's winter charity fund. Elizabeth took her position at the donations table beside Mrs. Pembroke, arranging the ledger and preparing to record each contribution. The room gradually filled with the county's prominent families, planters, merchants, lawyers, their wives adorned in silk and jewels that caught the lamplight. Elizabeth kept her eyes on her work, but she was aware of everything: the rustle of taffeta, the murmur of conversation, the careful choreography of social hierarchy. Then Thomas arrived, and the room seemed to shift its attention, however subtly, in his direction. He wore formal evening clothes that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, his bearing carrying that same controlled authority he brought to every situation. Several gentlemen immediately approached him, and Elizabeth watched as he engaged in conversation with the ease of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than seeking pleasure. Their eyes met across the room for one brief moment. Elizabeth felt heat rise in her face and quickly returned her attention to the ledger. The evening progressed with orderly efficiency. Elizabeth recorded donations, accepted items for auction, and directed guests to the appropriate tables. Mrs. Pembroke occasionally left her post to circulate, leaving Elizabeth to manage alone. She did so competently, her polite smile never wavering, her posture reflecting the dignity her mother had instilled in her. She was noting a donation of preserves when a voice interrupted her concentration. "Miss, I must say you are far too lovely to be hidden behind a table all evening." Elizabeth looked up to find a man of perhaps 35, well-dressed, but with an edge of looseness in his bearing that suggested too much wine. His smile was too familiar. "Thank you, sir, but I am here to work, not to socialize." She kept her tone polite but firm. "May I record your donation?" His smile widened. "Come now, surely you can spare a moment of conversation. What is your name?" "Elizabeth Brennan, sir, and I really must attend to these records." He leaned closer, his elbow resting on the table in a manner that invaded her space. "Brennan, Irish, yes? You have that look about you, that fire beneath the propriety." Elizabeth felt her jaw tighten. "Sir, if you have a donation to record, I am happy to assist. Otherwise, I must ask you to—" The man's hand moved as if to touch her arm, but before he could make contact, another voice cut through the space between them, cold and sharp as January ice. "Mr. Dawson, I believe the auction is beginning. Surely you would not want to miss the opportunity to support our charitable cause." Thomas stood just behind the man, his expression perfectly composed, but his grey eyes hard as stone. Dawson straightened immediately, his easy confidence faltering under that steady gaze. "Ashford, of course, I was just making a donation," Thomas finished. "Miss Brennan will be happy to record it." He waited, unmoving, a wall of quiet authority. Dawson fumbled for his wallet, placed several bills on the table with hands that now seemed unsteady, and retreated toward the auction tables without another word. Elizabeth watched him go, then looked up at Thomas. "Thank you, sir. Though I was managing, I have no doubt you were." His voice was low enough that only she could hear. However, Dawson has a reputation for persistent discourtesy, particularly toward women he considers beneath his notice. It was better to intervene. "I appreciate the consideration." They stood in a bubble of relative quiet while the room swirled around them. The music had begun, a lively polka that sent couples whirling across the floor. Thomas made no move to leave, and Elizabeth found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the way his formal clothes emphasized the strength of his frame, of the faint scent of sandalwood and something uniquely him. "You look well this evening, Miss Brennan," he said finally, and there was something in his tone that made the simple compliment feel weighted with meaning. "Thank you, sir. As do you." His mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. "Are you required to remain at this table all evening?" Mrs. Pembroke indicated I should stay unless relieved of duty. "I see." He was silent for a moment, then, "Would you object to dancing one set? It would be appropriate for an employer to show appreciation for his staff's service." Elizabeth's heart stumbled. It was a reasonable suggestion, framed in terms of propriety and gratitude, yet the way he looked at her suggested nothing reasonable at all. "I would not object, sir. though I confess my dancing is somewhat rusty, as is mine. We shall be equally disadvantaged." He offered his gloved hand. Elizabeth removed her own gloves, simple cotton, not the fine kid leather of the ladies twirling past, and placed her hand in his. The contact, even through fabric, sent awareness shooting up her arm. Thomas led her to the edge of the dancing area as the musicians began a waltz. He positioned her with careful formality, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers aloft. Elizabeth placed her free hand on his shoulder and felt the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric of his coat. They began to move. Elizabeth had learned to dance from her mother, who had insisted that grace was a skill every woman needed regardless of station. But dancing with Thomas was nothing like practicing with her mother in their small parlor. His lead was confident and sure, his hand at her waist a warm pressure that seemed to burn through layers of cloth. Their bodies moved in synchronization, following the music's rhythm, and Elizabeth became aware of every point where they touched, every breath they took. "You dance well, Miss Brennan," Thomas said, his voice close to her ear. "As do you, sir. You keep excellent time. I have had much practice keeping time. Control requires precision." "And do you always maintain control?" The question escaped before she could stop it, too bold, too personal. She felt his hand tighten almost imperceptibly at her waist. "Always," he said, but his voice carried a roughness that contradicted the word. They turned, and for a moment Elizabeth found herself pressed closer to him, near enough to feel the solid warmth of his chest, to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, to notice a small scar near his temple she had never observed before. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there for a heartbeat, then rose again to meet her eyes. The music swelled. They moved through the other dancers, separate from the crowd despite being surrounded by it. Elizabeth's breath came faster, though the dance was not particularly vigorous. She felt as if they were having a conversation without words, their bodies saying what their mouths could not. As the waltz drew to a close, Thomas guided her through a final turn that brought them to the edge of the floor. The music ended. Applause rippled through the room. Thomas released her waist, but continued to hold her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Brennan." "Thank you, sir. You maintain this gathering in perfect order." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that felt more intimate than any touch. "And you maintain the music in time," Elizabeth replied, echoing his earlier words about control with a meaning only he would understand. Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition, challenge, desire barely contained. Then he stepped back, restoring the proper distance between employer and employee, between man and woman, between what was and what could never be. He disappeared into the crowd of guests. Elizabeth returned to her table, her legs unsteady, her heart racing as if she had run a great distance. Mrs. Pembroke reappeared moments later, eyeing her with a sharp, knowing look that Elizabeth pretended not to notice. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Elizabeth recorded donations, smiled politely, and performed her duties flawlessly. But her body remembered the weight of Thomas's hand at her waist, the heat of his breath near her temple, the way his eyes had darkened when they looked at her mouth. When the ball finally ended and she returned to Riverside Hall in the carriage with Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper remained silent. But the silence felt heavy with unspoken warnings. Elizabeth lay in her narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling while moonlight painted silver squares on the floor. She knew she was playing with fire. She knew that whatever was building between her and Thomas Ashford could only end in heartbreak or scandal or both. Yet when she closed her eyes, all she could feel was his hand at her waist, guiding her through the dance, keeping time with her breath, breaking every rule of distance he had set for himself. And she knew, with certainty that terrified her, that neither of them could stop what had begun. The days following the ball carried a peculiar tension, as if the very air at Riverside Hall had grown thicker, harder to breathe. Elizabeth went about her duties with her usual efficiency, but she found herself listening for Thomas's footsteps, aware of his presence even when he was rooms away. Their interactions remained professional, yet every brief exchange felt weighted, charged with something neither dared acknowledge. Thomas, for his part, seemed to retreat further into work. He spent long hours at the mill, returned to the house after dark, and communicated through written notes left on the hall table rather than seeking Elizabeth out in person. She told herself this was proper, appropriate. She told herself she was relieved. She was lying. Wednesday brought oppressive heat, the kind that pressed down on the shoulders and made even simple movements feel laborious. The sky hung low and grey, promising storms but not yet delivering. Elizabeth worked in the library, cataloguing correspondence and updating inventories, grateful for the relative coolness of the book-lined room. She had discovered, during her time at Riverside Hall, that Thomas had an extensive collection of books, not just ledgers and business texts, but literature, poetry, volumes on architecture and engineering. She had also found, tucked among the history texts, several books of sheet music. One afternoon, when she was certain she was alone, she had taken one down and paged through it, surprised by the complexity of the pieces, the annotations in careful handwriting that suggested someone had studied them seriously. Now, as thunder rumbled distantly and the first gusts of wind rattled the windows, Elizabeth found herself holding another music book, Chopin Nocturnes, well worn, with notes penciled in the margins. She carried it to the main hall where a piano stood, largely ignored, its surface polished but its keys silent. She should not. It was presumptuous. But the house was empty. Mrs. Pembroke was visiting her sister in town, the servants were occupied in their quarters, and Thomas was presumably still at the mill. Elizabeth opened the piano, set the music on the stand, and let her fingers find the keys. She played tentatively at first, her skill rusty from lack of practice. But muscle memory returned, and soon the notes flowed more smoothly, filling the empty hall with sound. She lost herself in the music, in the melancholy beauty of Chopin's phrases, and did not hear the front door open or the footsteps that stopped at the threshold. When the piece ended, she sat with her hands still on the keys, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Then a voice spoke from behind her, quiet but intense. "I did not know you played." Elizabeth's eyes flew open. She spun on the bench to find Thomas standing in the doorway, rain-soaked, his coat dark with water, his hair plastered to his forehead. He must have been caught in the storm that had broken while she was lost in music. "I apologize, sir. I should not have presumed. Do not apologize." He moved into the room, leaving wet footprints on the polished floor. "I have not heard music in this house since my sister died. She was the one who played." Elizabeth stood, uncertain, her heart racing. "I found the sheet music in the library. I thought no one used them anymore." "No one does." Thomas's gaze moved to the piano, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "Caroline insisted I learn as well. She said music was necessary for a complete soul. I was never as talented as she was, but I tried." A crack of thunder shook the house, closer now. The storm was directly overhead. Wind howled through the eaves, and Elizabeth heard the sharp report of something, a shutter perhaps breaking loose. Both she and Thomas looked toward the library at the same moment. "The window," Elizabeth said. They moved simultaneously, nearly colliding in the doorway. The library window had blown open, rain pouring in, soaking the curtains and pooling on the floor. Papers on the nearby desk were scattering in the wind. Elizabeth reached the window first, struggling against the wind to pull the casement closed. Thomas was beside her in an instant, adding his strength to hers. Their hands met on the latch, his covering hers, and together they forced the window shut and secured the fastening. For a moment they stood there, breathing hard, rain dripping from their clothes onto the floor. Thomas's hand remained over hers on the latch. Neither moved. Then slowly he lifted his other hand and brushed a strand of wet hair away from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers lingered there, tracing the curve of her ear, then following the line of her jaw. Elizabeth felt as if she had forgotten how to breathe. "Miss Brennan," he said, and his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "Elizabeth." Her name on his lips undid something in her. She turned fully toward him, and his hand moved from her jaw to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it made her ache. "We should not," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "I know." But neither pulled away. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows, thunder rolling across the sky. Inside the library they stood close enough to share breath, close enough to feel the heat radiating between them despite their rain-soaked clothes. Thomas's gaze moved over her face as if memorizing it, her eyes, her mouth, the curve of her throat. "We should not," he repeated, but his hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading into her wet hair. Elizabeth's hands found his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath the soaked fabric of his shirt. "Sir," she began, but he shook his head. "Thomas. My name is Thomas." Thomas. The name felt intimate on her tongue, forbidden and thrilling. "Thomas. This is dangerous." "I know." His forehead lowered to rest against hers, their noses nearly touching, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "God help me, I know." They stood suspended in that moment, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Rain streamed down the windows, lightning flashed, illuminating their faces in stark white light. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it seemed to shake the foundations of the house. And then Thomas's mouth was on hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was hunger unleashed, need that had been compressed into silence finally finding voice. His lips moved against hers with desperate intensity, and Elizabeth responded with equal fervor, her hands gripping his shoulders, pulling him closer. His arm wrapped around her waist, pressing her against him until she could feel every hard plane of his body through their wet clothes. They kissed as if they were drowning, and each was the other's only source of air. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, and she opened for him, tasting rain and something darker, more intoxicating. A sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half moan, and she felt him shudder in response. His hand tightened in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. Her fingers found the buttons of his collar, fumbling with the wet fabric, desperate to feel skin. He broke the kiss only long enough to gasp her name again, then captured her mouth once more, walking her backward until her spine met the bookshelf. The solid surface against her back and the solid heat of his body against her front created a perfect prison she had no desire to escape. She arched into him and he groaned, his hips pressing forward in response. Even through layers of clothing, she could feel his desire hard and insistent, and the knowledge sent liquid heat pooling low in her belly. His mouth left hers to trail hot kisses along her jaw, down her throat. She tilted her head back, giving him access, her breath coming in short gasps. When his lips found the hollow at the base of her throat, she whimpered, and his arm around her waist tightened almost painfully. "Elizabeth," he breathed against her skin. "Elizabeth, we must stop." "Must we?" Her voice was barely recognizable, husky with desire. "If we do not stop now, I will not be able to." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they ignited something fierce and reckless in her chest. "Then do not stop." Thomas pulled back, just enough to look at her, his grey eyes nearly black with want, his chest heaving. "Do you understand what you are saying?" "I understand." She reached up, cupping his face between her hands, feeling the roughness of stubble against her palms. "I understand perfectly." For a long moment he simply looked at her, searching her face for doubt or fear. She met his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth. She wanted this, wanted him. Consequences be damned. But then something shifted in his expression. The desire remained, but it was joined by something else, pain perhaps, or fear, or the weight of responsibility he could never quite shed. Slowly, carefully, he stepped back, creating space between them. "Not like this," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "Not in haste, not in a moment of storm and madness. You deserve more." Elizabeth felt the loss of his warmth like a physical wound. Her body screamed in protest, but her mind recognized the honor in his restraint, the care beneath his refusal. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the lingering heat. "I should go," she said. "Change out of these wet clothes." "Yes." Thomas's hands clenched at his sides, as if preventing them from reaching for her again. "Elizabeth, do not apologize." She raised her chin, summoning dignity she did not feel. "I am not a child who needs protection from her own choices. I know. That is what terrifies me." They stood across the rain-darkened library, the storm still raging outside, both of them soaked and shaking with want and restraint in equal measure. Then Elizabeth turned and walked toward the door on legs that felt unsteady. At the threshold she paused and looked back. Thomas had not moved, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The storm will pass," she said quietly, "but what has begun between us will not." She did not wait for his response. She climbed the stairs to her room, changed into dry clothes with trembling hands, and sat on her narrow bed listening to thunder roll away toward distant hills. Her lips still burned from his kiss. Her body still ached with unfulfilled desire. But stronger than either was the certainty that nothing between them would ever be simple again, and that the careful distance they had maintained was now irreparably shattered. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if the sky itself had been washed clean. But inside Riverside Hall, the air felt different, charged with something new and unnamed. Elizabeth rose early, dressed with particular care, and descended to her duties with her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. She found evidence of the storm everywhere. Branches scattered across the lawn, petals torn from the azaleas, a loose shutter hanging at an angle. But inside, the house had been quietly restored. The library floor was dry, the scattered papers retrieved and organized. Someone, Thomas, she suspected, had been up even earlier than she, putting things back in order. Control, she thought. He always returns to control. Yet when she entered the morning room to begin her correspondence work, she found something that made her pause. A vase of fresh flowers on her desk. Not the formal arrangements Mrs. Pembroke favored for the public rooms, but a simple gathering of wildflowers, Queen Anne's lace, black-eyed Susans, sprigs of purple ironweed, the kind that grew along the river path. Elizabeth touched one delicate petal, her throat tight. No note accompanied them, but none was needed. She understood the language of this offering. Acknowledgement, apology, promise. All the things he could not say aloud. The day proceeded with careful normality. Elizabeth organized correspondence, updated inventories, managed household accounts. But she noticed changes, small adjustments in the fabric of daily life at Riverside Hall. Thomas began taking his morning coffee in the breakfast room rather than his study, the same room where Elizabeth now reviewed the household menus with Cook. Their paths crossed more frequently, and though their conversations remained outwardly proper, beneath the surface ran currents of awareness that made every word feel weighted. "Good morning, Miss Brennan. I trust you slept well after yesterday's excitement." "Quite well, thank you, sir." "And you?" "As well as can be expected." He paused, his gaze holding hers a moment longer than necessary. "The library suffered no lasting damage, I believe?" "No, sir. Everything has been restored to order." "Order?" "Yes." His mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. "Order is important." But the way he looked at her suggested he was thinking of disorder, of control surrendered, of lips meeting in a rain-darkened room. Over the following days, Elizabeth noticed other shifts. The chairs in the library were repositioned to catch the morning light better. Fresh flowers appeared regularly throughout the house, not just in her workspace but in rooms Thomas frequented. The heavy drapes in the main hall were pulled back, allowing sunlight to flood spaces that had been kept dim. Riverside Hall was waking up, breathing differently. One afternoon, Elizabeth was cataloguing books in the library when she discovered something tucked between volumes of agricultural treatises, more sheet music, different from the Chopin she had found before. These were folk songs, simpler pieces, some with lyrics written in pencil along the margins, Caroline's handwriting perhaps, or Thomas's own. She pulled one free, a ballad about a sailor returning home, and carried it to the piano without thinking. Her fingers found the melody, and she began to play softly, half-humming the words. She did not hear Thomas enter. Only when she reached the chorus did she become aware of his presence. She stopped abruptly, hands frozen above the keys. "Please," he said from the doorway, "do not stop on my account." "I did not mean to presume, sir." "You are not presuming." He moved into the room, but instead of approaching the piano, he went to the windows, looking out toward the river. "My sister used to play that song. She learned it from one of the housemaids who came from the coast. It is lovely." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "She believed houses needed music to be alive. I did not understand what she meant until after she was gone, and the silence became unbearable. Elizabeth's heart ached for the grief she heard beneath his words. "Is that why you stopped playing?" "I stopped because I could not bear to hear the songs she loved without hearing her voice alongside them." He turned from the window, meeting her eyes across the room. But perhaps that was the wrong choice. Perhaps silence is not honor, but cowardice. Or protection, Elizabeth offered gently. Perhaps both. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting golden bars across the floor between them. Thomas looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, desire held in check by something stronger, not propriety exactly, but consideration, care. "Would you play something else?" he asked. "Anything you choose." Elizabeth turned back to the piano, rifling through the music sheets until she found a piece that felt right, a Mozart sonata, bright and structured. Nothing like the storm of emotion she felt inside. She began to play, and after a few measures she heard Thomas move closer. He did not sit beside her on the bench, but he stood near enough that she could sense his presence, feel the warmth of him at her shoulder. When she reached a particularly complex passage and stumbled slightly, his voice came low and steady. "There, that measure. Let your left hand lead, and the right will follow." She tried again, and it smoothed out. A small smile touched her lips. "You do play." "Not in many years, but the memory remains." They continued like that, Elizabeth playing while Thomas occasionally offered guidance, his voice a quiet presence that somehow made the music richer. The afternoon deepened toward evening, and still they remained connected by melody and the careful space between them that felt both safe and charged with possibility. When Elizabeth finally lifted her hands from the keys, the room settled into a comfortable quiet. She looked up to find Thomas watching her, his expression unguarded in a way she had never seen. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what, sir?" "For reminding me that this house can hold more than silence." That night, as Elizabeth prepared for bed, she noticed other small changes. Someone had left additional candles in her room, better quality than the standard household issue. A new quilt had appeared on her bed, finer than the serviceable blanket she had been using. When she opened her wardrobe to hang her dress, she found that the loose hinge had been repaired. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, recognizing the care in these anonymous gestures. Thomas was not a man who spoke his feelings easily, but he was finding other ways to communicate them. Through flowers and repairs, through music shared in afternoon light, through the slow transformation of his cold house into something warmer. The following morning brought a letter for Elizabeth, delivered with the household post. The Richmond postmark made her heart clench with both hope and fear. She opened it with trembling fingers. Samuel's handwriting was shaky but legible. The sanatorium was helping, he wrote. The treatments were difficult, but he was breathing easier. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. He thanked her for the money she sent, assured her he was being brave, and told her not to worry. Elizabeth read the letter 3 times, relief and love warring with the constant anxiety of insufficient funds. The position at Riverside Hall paid well, but medical care was expensive, and she was always calculating, always aware of how little margin for error existed. She was still holding the letter when Thomas entered the morning room for his usual coffee. He took one look at her face and set down his cup. "Bad news?" "No, sir. Good news, actually. My brother is improving, yet you look troubled." Elizabeth hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than evasion. "The treatments are expensive. I am grateful for this position, but I worry it will not be enough." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "How old is your brother?" 17. "He has lung disease. The sanatorium in Richmond is his best chance." "I see." Thomas picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it down again. "You mentioned once that your mother was a seamstress." "She was. She taught me to sew, to keep accounts, to value precision. She died when I was 19. Samuel was just a boy, and you raised him." "As best I could." Elizabeth met his eyes. "I did not tell you this to ask for charity, sir. I only meant to explain my circumstances. I did not think you were asking." Thomas's voice was gentle. "But I want you to know that if you need an advance on your wages, or a loan, no." Elizabeth's voice was firm. "Thank you. But no. I have managed this far on my own terms. I will continue to do so." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Very well. But the offer stands, should circumstances change. He left the room, but 10 minutes later, Mrs. Pembroke appeared with an unexpected announcement. Mr. Ashford has decided to increase staff wages across the household, effective immediately. He believes your work merits additional compensation. Elizabeth stared at the housekeeper. All staff? All staff, Mrs. Pembroke confirmed, but her sharp eyes suggested she understood perfectly well who had prompted this sudden generosity. That evening, Elizabeth found Thomas in the library reviewing timber contracts. She stood in the doorway until he looked up. That was not necessary, she said. What was not necessary? The wage increase. I know why you did it. I did it because the work merits it. He held her gaze steadily. If you benefit, that is merely good fortune. Thomas. She used his given name deliberately, quietly, and saw him react to it like a physical touch. Thank you. He rose from his desk, moved toward her with that controlled grace she had come to recognize. When he stood before her, close but not quite touching, he spoke in a voice low enough that only she could hear. I cannot give you what you deserve, Elizabeth. I cannot offer you more than this position, this house, these stolen moments. But what I can give, I give freely. Let me do this much. Her throat tight, she nodded. Then, rising on her toes, she pressed a brief kiss to his cheek, feeling stubble rasp against her lips, breathing in the scent of him. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with barely contained desire. If you do that again, he said roughly, I will not be responsible for what happens next. A challenge or a promise? She smiled, just slightly. Both. She left him standing there, knowing his eyes followed her, knowing that with each passing day the space between what they were and what they wanted to become grew smaller, harder to maintain, more dangerous to cross, but also knowing that neither of them had the strength to stop. The October morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day when every sound carried sharp and distinct across the grounds of Riverside Hall. Elizabeth was in the service yard, reviewing a delivery of new blankets and linens that Mrs. Pembroke had ordered for the winter months. She checked each item against the invoice, making notes in her ledger with careful precision. She was examining the weave quality of a wool blanket when a voice called out from the main drive. Good morning. I am looking for Mr. Ashford regarding the shipping crate specifications. Elizabeth turned to see a young man of perhaps 25 approaching, dressed in the practical clothes of a railway engineer. He carried blueprints under one arm and had an open, friendly face that broke easily into a smile. Mr. Ashford is at the mill this morning, Elizabeth replied, setting down the blanket. I expect him to return within the hour. May I give him a message? The young man removed his hat respectfully. James Crawford, with the Richmond and Danville Railway. We are coordinating new dimensions for the lumber shipments. Mr. Ashford requested I come by to confirm the measurements in person. I see. Elizabeth made a note in her ledger. Would you like to wait in the front parlor? I can have someone bring you coffee. That is very kind, Miss Brennan, Elizabeth Brennan, Miss Brennan. He smiled warmly. I confess I would rather wait out here in this fine weather if you do not mind. The office air grows stale after too many hours. Elizabeth returned to her inventory work, and Crawford settled on a nearby bench, spreading his blueprints across his knees. After a few moments of companionable silence, he spoke again. You keep excellent records, Miss Brennan. I can see that from here. My own handwriting tends toward illegibility, I'm afraid. Elizabeth glanced up, a small smile touching her lips. Practice makes perfection, Mr. Crawford. I had a demanding teacher. Your mother? Elizabeth nodded. She believed that careless work reflected a careless mind. A wise woman. Crawford's tone was genuine, absent of the condescension she sometimes encountered. My own mother tried to teach me penmanship, but I fear I was a hopeless student. Numbers made sense to me, but letters always seemed to wander across the page. Elizabeth found herself relaxing into easy conversation. They discussed the challenges of keeping accurate records, the particular difficulties of coordinating railway schedules with timber production, the recent improvements to the Richmond line. Crawford was intelligent and pleasant, with none of the presumption that Mr. Dawson had displayed at the ball. She was laughing at a story about a shipment mix-up that had sent piano parts to a lumber mill when she felt it. That particular shift in the air that meant Thomas had arrived. She looked up to find him standing near the corner of the house, having apparently just returned from the mill. His face was perfectly composed, but his jaw carried a tension she recognized, and his grey eyes had gone cold as winter stone. "Mr. Crawford," he said, his voice clipped, "I was not expecting you until this afternoon." Crawford rose immediately, gathering his blueprints. "Mr. Ashford, sir, my apologies. The morning train ran early, and I thought I would take advantage of the extra time." "Indeed." Thomas's gaze moved to Elizabeth, sharp and assessing. "Miss Brennan, do you not have duties inside the house?" The words were proper, the tone professional, but Elizabeth felt the sting beneath them, as if he had struck her. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she straightened her spine. "I am completing the inventory Mrs. Pembroke assigned, sir, as requested." "How efficient." His voice held an edge she had never heard directed at her before. "When you have finished playing hostess, perhaps you could attend to the correspondence that arrived this morning." The unfairness of it hit Elizabeth like cold water. She had been conducting business, not entertaining, and Thomas knew it. She met his eyes steadily, refusing to flinch. "Of course, sir, I live to serve." The words came out sharper than she intended, carrying an edge of their own. Something flickered in Thomas's expression. Recognition, perhaps, that he had overstepped. But he did not apologize. "Mr. Crawford, shall we review your specifications in my study?" Thomas gestured toward the house, his movements stiff. "Certainly, sir." As the two men walked away, Crawford glanced back at Elizabeth with a look of sympathy that made her humiliation complete. She stood alone in the service yard, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her ledger. She finished the inventory with mechanical precision, her mind churning. What right did Thomas have to speak to her that way? They had shared kisses, yes, but no promises had been made. She was his employee. If he wanted to claim some right over her company, her conversations, her time, then he should have the courage to do so openly, rather than hiding behind thinly veiled reprimands. By the time she returned to the morning room, her initial hurt had crystallized into anger. She found a stack of correspondence waiting, along with a note in Thomas's handwriting. "Please prepare responses by this evening." Elizabeth sat at her desk and pulled the letters toward her with more force than necessary. She worked through them methodically, her pen moving faster than usual, her responses correct but cooler than they might have been. She was sealing the last envelope when Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Miss Brennan, I need to discuss—" "I believe everything is in order, sir." Elizabeth kept her eyes on her work. "The responses are ready for your review." Elizabeth. The use of her given name made her look up, despite herself. He stood in the doorway, his expression no longer cold, but uncertain, almost vulnerable. It was such a change from his earlier demeanor that she found her anger wavering. "Yes, sir?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, a breach of propriety that would have scandalized Mrs. Pembroke. "May I explain?" "Explain what, sir?" "That I should not engage in cordial conversation with business associates, that my conduct this morning was inappropriate." Elizabeth kept her voice level, but her eyes blazed. "Or perhaps you wish to explain what right you have to monitor my interactions when you have made it abundantly clear that whatever exists between us must remain hidden, unnamed, and without consequence." Thomas flinched, as if she had struck him. "That is not what I—" "Then what, Thomas?" She stood, her hands flat on the desk. What was that display in the yard? Jealousy? Possession? She shook her head. "You cannot have it both ways. You cannot treat me as your employee in public and your whatever I am to you in private. Cordial conversation is not infidelity, and you insult both of us by suggesting otherwise." He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like shame. "You are right." Elizabeth blinked, surprised. "What?" "You are absolutely right." Thomas moved closer, but slowly, as if approaching something skittish. "I had no right to speak to you that way. No right to let my own—" He stopped, searching for words. "My own jealousy. Yes, let us call it what it is. No right to let it dictate my behavior. Mr. Crawford is a colleague, a pleasant acquaintance. Nothing more. I know. Thomas's hands clenched at his sides. Logically, I know that. But when I saw you laughing with him, so easy and natural, I felt... He shook his head. I felt something I have no claim to feel, something I have no right to demand. Then why do you feel it? Elizabeth's voice softened despite herself. Because I want to be the one who makes you laugh like that. Thomas met her eyes, and the naked honesty in his gaze stole her breath. Because I want to stand beside you in daylight, in public, without pretense or distance. Because every moment I spend maintaining this charade of indifference feels like a betrayal of something I cannot even name. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock. Elizabeth felt her anger dissolving, replaced by an ache that spread through her chest. But I cannot give you that, Thomas continued, his voice breaking slightly. I cannot offer you what you deserve. Public acknowledgement, respectability, a future. All I have are these stolen moments and a heart that beats faster every time you enter a room. And you think that is not enough? Elizabeth moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. You think I do not feel the same impossibility? Then what are we doing, Elizabeth? He reached for her hands, gripping them almost desperately. Where does this end? I do not know. She squeezed his hands in return, feeling the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. But I do know this. I will not be spoken to as if I am property. I will not be made to feel ashamed for existing in the world. If you want me in your life, you must trust me, and you must treat me with the respect you would show any person you claim to care for. You are right. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing kisses to her knuckles with a reverence that made her throat tight. Forgive me, I was a fool. Yes, Elizabeth said, but her voice was gentle now. You were. He pulled her closer and she went willingly, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her cheek, his arms wrapped around her, holding her as if she might disappear. I do care for you, he murmured into her hair. More than is wise. More than I can afford. I know. Elizabeth's arms circled his waist. I feel it too. They stood like that for a long moment, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, the house quiet around them. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas cupped her face in his hands. I will do better, he promised. I will be worthy of what you offer. See that you do. She smiled, just slightly. Because I will not tolerate such foolishness twice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Understood. He kissed her then, soft and apologetic, a kiss that asked forgiveness and promised care. When they separated, both knew that something had shifted between them again. Not broken but tested and found resilient. Thomas left first, as propriety demanded. Elizabeth returned to her desk, her heart still racing, her body still humming with awareness of him. She picked up her pen to continue her work, but her hand hovered over the paper. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of Riverside Hall continuing, servants going about their duties, horses in the stable, the distant rhythm of the mill. Everything appeared unchanged, but Elizabeth knew better. They had crossed another line today, spoken truths that could not be unspoken, and with each line crossed, the space left for retreat grew smaller, until soon there would be nowhere left to go but forward into whatever uncertain future waited beyond these careful walls. The evening descended on Riverside Hall with unusual stillness. Mrs. Pembroke had departed after supper to attend to her sister who had taken ill and would not return until the following day. The household staff retired early, their duties complete. The great house settled into quietness, lamplight glowing warm in scattered windows. Elizabeth worked late in the guest room that had been converted to storage, completing the autumn inventory as Mrs. Pembroke had requested. The room was pleasant despite its utilitarian purpose, furnished with a bed draped in dust covers, a writing desk, and tall windows that overlooked the gardens. Lamps burned low, casting golden light across ledgers and lists. She was recording the count of winter linens when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She knew them instantly, the particular cadence that made her pulse quicken. Thomas appeared in the doorway, still dressed for evening, but with his collar loosened, his dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his fingers through it. He held a small oil lamp, and in its light his face showed lines of strain and something else. Determination, perhaps, or surrender. I need to speak with you. he said quietly. Elizabeth set down her pen, her heart beginning to race. "Of course, sir." "Thomas?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "When we are alone, I am Thomas." "Thomas." She stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "What did you need to discuss?" He set the lamp on the desk and turned to face her fully. "This afternoon, after our conversation about my inexcusable behavior, I realized something." "What was that?" "That I have been a coward." He moved closer, and Elizabeth could see the emotion working in his face, the battle between control and something wilder. "I have hidden behind propriety and impossibility, while wanting something I told myself I could not have. I have treated what exists between us as if it were shameful, when the only shameful thing is my inability to honor it properly. Thomas, we discussed this. There are realities we cannot ignore. I know the realities." His voice was rough, intense. "I know that society would condemn us, that I risk your reputation, that I can offer you nothing but scandal. I know all of it. But Elizabeth, I also know that every moment I spend pretending I do not feel what I feel is a lie that corrodes my soul." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am tired of distance, tired of stolen moments, tired of treating the woman I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "The woman I love as if she were merely another piece of household inventory." The world seemed to stop. "Love." He had said love. "You love me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." Thomas cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "God help me, yes. I have tried not to. I have told myself 100 reasons why I should not. But the heart does not listen to reason, and mine belongs entirely to you." A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. "I love you too," Elizabeth said, the words releasing something that had been bound tight in her chest. "I have loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. I love your control and the moments when it breaks. I love your kindness hidden behind walls. I love the man who brings me flowers and repairs hinges and remembers that houses need music. Then let me love you properly." His forehead rested against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "Let me show you what I cannot say. Let me give you the only truth I have." Elizabeth's hands found his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heart. "Yes." The word was barely spoken before his mouth found hers. The kiss was different from the desperate collision in the library during the storm. This was slower, deeper, a claiming and a surrender all at once. His lips moved against hers with focused intensity, tasting, exploring, memorizing. When his tongue traced the seam of her mouth, she opened for him immediately, meeting him with equal fervor. His hands moved from her face to her shoulders, down her arms, finally settling at her waist to pull her closer. Elizabeth pressed against him, her fingers sliding up to thread through his hair, pulling him deeper into the kiss. A low sound rumbled in his chest, and she felt it vibrate through her entire body. When they finally broke apart for air, both were breathing hard. Thomas rested his forehead against hers again, his eyes closed. "Tell me to stop," he said roughly. "Tell me to leave while I still have the strength." "No." Elizabeth's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "I want this. I want you." His eyes opened, dark with desire but also searching. "Are you certain? Because if we do this, Elizabeth, there is no returning to what we were. I do not want to return. I want to go forward. With you." Something in his expression shifted, the last of his restraint crumbling. He kissed her again, harder now, walking her backward until her legs met the edge of the covered bed. His hands moved to the buttons at the back of her dress, fumbling slightly. "May I?" His voice was hoarse. "Yes." He worked the buttons with hands that shook slightly, his lips never leaving hers. When the dress loosened, he slid it from her shoulders, letting it pool at her feet. Elizabeth stood in her chemise and petticoats, more exposed than she had ever been before any man, but she felt no shame. Only desire and trust and love so fierce it burned. "You are beautiful," Thomas breathed, his gaze moving over her with reverence. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you. Then touch me instead." His hands obeyed, sliding over the thin fabric of her chemise. tracing the curve of her waist, the line of her ribs. When his palms cupped her breasts through the cloth, Elizabeth gasped, her head falling back. He lowered his mouth to her throat, kissing the pulse point there, then moving lower to the hollow between her collarbones. "Your turn," Elizabeth managed, her fingers finding the buttons of his shirt. She worked them open, her hands clumsy with desire and inexperience. When she finally pushed the fabric aside, she pressed her palms against the bare skin of his chest, feeling the hard muscle, the warmth, the rapid beat of his heart. Thomas groaned at her touch, his arms tightening around her. "Elizabeth, if you keep doing that, I will not be able to—" "Then do not." She pulled him down onto the bed with her. They tumbled onto the mattress together, laughing breathlessly despite the intensity of their desire. Thomas braced himself above her, looking down with an expression that made her chest ache. "I have never done this before," Elizabeth admitted quietly. "I do not know." "Neither have I." His confession surprised her. "I have never wanted anyone enough to risk this, to risk what I feel. Then we learn together." "Yes." He kissed her again, slow and deep. Together. What followed was a careful dance of discovery. Thomas removed the rest of her undergarments with reverent slowness, pausing to kiss each new expanse of skin revealed. Elizabeth helped him shed his remaining clothes, her hands exploring the planes and angles of his body with growing confidence. When they were finally bare to each other, they simply looked, memorizing, marveling. Then Thomas positioned himself above her, his weight supported on his arms. His hand slid between them, touching her intimately, and Elizabeth gasped at the sensation, her hips rising instinctively. He stroked her gently, carefully, learning what made her breath catch and her body arch. "Tell me if I hurt you," he murmured against her mouth. "You could never hurt me." But when he finally began to enter her, there was pain, a sharp, stretching sensation that made her tense. Thomas stilled immediately, his entire body trembling with the effort of restraint. "Breathe," he whispered. "Breathe with me." Elizabeth forced herself to relax, matching her breathing to his. Slowly, carefully, he moved deeper, his eyes locked on her face, watching for any sign of distress. The pain eased, replaced by a feeling of fullness, of completion, of rightness. "All right?" His voice was strained. "Yes." More than all right. He began to move, slowly at first, a gentle rhythm that gradually built in intensity. Elizabeth's hands gripped his shoulders, then slid down his back, feeling muscles flex beneath her palms. The sensation was overwhelming. Not just physical, though her body sang with pleasure, but emotional. This was trust made flesh, love given form. "Elizabeth," he breathed, his face buried in her neck. "My Elizabeth." "Yours," she confirmed. "Always yours." The rhythm increased, both of them moving together now, finding synchronization as naturally as they had when dancing. Elizabeth felt tension building low in her belly, spiraling tighter and tighter. When Thomas's hand moved between them again, touching where their bodies joined, something inside her shattered into pure sensation. She cried out, her body arching, waves of pleasure rolling through her. Thomas followed moments later, his rhythm breaking into desperate thrusts before he stilled completely, his body shuddering, her name on his lips like a prayer. They collapsed together, breathing hard, slick with sweat tangled in sheets and each other. For a long moment neither spoke, both simply existing in the aftermath of what had just occurred. Finally, Thomas shifted his weight, rolling to the side but pulling Elizabeth with him so she remained tucked against his chest. He reached down and pulled a blanket over them both, covering her shoulders, keeping her warm. "Are you all right?" His hand stroked her hair gently. "I am more than all right." Elizabeth pressed a kiss to his chest. "I am complete." He tightened his arms around her. "I did not hurt you. Only a little at first. But Thomas, that was—" She struggled for words. "Everything. Yes." He kissed the top of her head. "Everything." They lay in comfortable silence, Elizabeth tracing idle patterns on his chest, Thomas's fingers combing through her hair. The lamps burned low, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Outside, the night was still and quiet. "What happens now?" Elizabeth finally asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his hand never ceasing its gentle motion through her hair. Now, I stop being a coward. Now, I claim what I want instead of hiding from it. She lifted her head to look at him. What do you want? You. He met her gaze steadily. As my wife, if you will have me. As my partner, my equal, my love. I want to present you at the next gathering not as my employee, but as the woman I intend to marry. I want the world to know what my heart has known for weeks. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. But the scandal. Let them talk. His jaw set with determination. I have spent 10 years building walls to protect myself from loss. But you have shown me that a life without risk is no life at all. I would rather face scandal with you than spend another day in respectable loneliness. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. Marry me, Elizabeth. Make this house a home. Fill it with music and laughter and life. Save me from the cold silence I mistook for safety. Yes. The word came out on a laugh that was half sob. Yes, Thomas. I will marry you. He kissed her then, deep and slow and sweet, sealing the promise. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. They made love again, slower this time, with the urgency replaced by tenderness and exploration. They learned each other's bodies, discovered what brought pleasure, whispered endearments and promises. And when they finally slept, it was tangled together, Elizabeth's head on Thomas's shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. The lamps burned down to nothing. The house slept, and in the guest room that smelled of lemon oil and lamp smoke and love, two souls found the rest they had been seeking for so long. Elizabeth woke to pale morning light, filtering through the guest room windows. For a moment she lay still, savoring the warmth of Thomas's body beside hers, the weight of his arm across her waist, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The events of the previous night felt both impossibly distant and intensely present, the declarations, the promises, the joining of bodies and souls. She turned her head to look at him. In sleep, the lines of tension in his face had softened, making him appear younger, more vulnerable. Her heart swelled with such fierce love it was almost painful. As if sensing her gaze, Thomas's eyes opened. For a heartbeat, confusion crossed his features. Then memory returned and his expression transformed into something so tender, it stole her breath. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." Elizabeth smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "How do you feel?" "Happy. Loved. A little sore, if I am being honest. A flicker of concern. I was too rough. No." Elizabeth silenced him with a kiss. "You were perfect. Everything was perfect." They remained in bed longer than they should have, stealing moments that felt suspended outside of time. But eventually, reality reasserted itself. The household would be waking. Mrs. Pembroke would return before noon. They needed to rise to dress, to resume their roles until Thomas could make his intentions public. Elizabeth dressed first, while Thomas watched from the bed, his gaze following her movements with possessive appreciation. When she was fully clothed, hair pinned back into its customary arrangement, she turned to find him standing, pulling on his shirt. "Tonight," he said, buttoning his cuffs, "I will speak with the rector. We can post the banns this Sunday." "So soon?" "Is it too soon?" He moved to her, taking her hands. "I do not want to wait, Elizabeth. I have wasted too much time already." "No, it is not too soon." She squeezed his hands. "I want the same thing." They parted at the doorway with a final kiss, Thomas heading to his chambers to change properly for the day. Elizabeth descending to the morning room to begin her duties. Her body hummed with awareness of him, with the memory of his hands, his mouth, the way he had whispered her name in the darkness. She was setting out the morning correspondence when she heard voices from the main entrance. Mrs. Pembroke returning earlier than expected, accompanied by other voices Elizabeth did not immediately recognize. Footsteps approached. Mrs. Pembroke appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with disapproval barely held in check. "Miss Brennan, Mr. Ashford requires you in his study immediately. There are visitors." Something in the housekeeper's tone sent warning prickling down Elizabeth's spine. She set down the papers and followed Mrs. Pembroke through the hallway, her heart beginning to beat faster. The study door stood open. Inside, Thomas stood behind his desk, his posture rigid, his face carefully neutral. But Elizabeth could see the tension in his shoulders, the muscle working in his jaw. 3 men occupied the chairs before the desk, gentlemen by their dress, businessmen by their bearing. One she recognized as Mr. Patterson, a timber merchant from Charleston who had invested in several of Thomas's ventures. "Ah," Patterson said as Elizabeth entered, his gaze sweeping over her with assessment that made her skin crawl. This must be the young woman in question. Elizabeth stopped just inside the doorway, confusion and dread warring in her chest. Thomas's eyes met hers for one brief moment, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Apology, anger, fear. "Miss Brennan," Thomas said, and his voice was different, colder, the voice of an employer addressing staff. "These gentlemen have concerns about some correspondence delays. Please bring the files for the Charleston contracts." It was a dismissal, clear and cutting. Elizabeth felt as if she had been slapped. "Of course, sir." She turned to fetch the files, but Patterson's voice stopped her. "Before you go, my dear, let me ask you something. How long have you been employed at Riverside Hall?" Elizabeth looked at Thomas, but he was studying the papers on his desk, his face expressionless. "Nearly 2 months, sir. And you manage household correspondence and inventories?" "Among other duties, yes. Must be quite educational working so closely with a man of Mr. Ashford's standing." Patterson's tone carried an insinuation that made Elizabeth's cheeks burn. "I take my responsibilities seriously, sir." "I am certain you do." Patterson exchanged glances with his companions, and something in those looks made Elizabeth feel exposed, diminished. Thomas finally looked up. "That will be all, Miss Brennan. Please retrieve those files." Elizabeth left the study, her hands trembling, her mind racing. She located the Charleston files and returned, handing them to Thomas without meeting his eyes. As she turned to leave again, she heard Patterson speak. "You keep your household well organized, Ashford. Though I must say, for a man of your station, employing such an attractive young woman in such proximity seems rather, shall we say, unconventional. Miss Brennan is competent and professional." Thomas's voice was tight. "Her appearance is irrelevant." Of course. But you understand how people talk, especially in these circumstances, with no proper family connection, no chaperone beyond your housekeeper. It raises questions about propriety." Elizabeth stood frozen just outside the doorway, hidden from view but unable to make herself move further away. Her heart hammered in her chest. "I assure you, gentlemen, my household arrangements are entirely appropriate." Thomas's words were clipped, formal. "Miss Brennan is an employee, nothing more. She performs her duties and maintains proper boundaries." The words hit Elizabeth like physical blows. An employee, nothing more. Proper boundaries. She knew what he was doing, protecting her reputation, protecting their future. But the cold dismissal in his voice, the way he reduced what they shared to mere employment, cut deeper than any knife. "Glad to hear it," Patterson said, "because if there were any hint of impropriety, well, you understand how that could affect business relationships. Investors prefer to deal with men of unquestionable character. A scandal involving a household servant would be, shall we say, problematic." "There is no scandal." Thomas's voice was harder now, angry beneath the control. "Nor will there be any basis for such rumors. Miss Brennan knows her place." Elizabeth could not listen anymore. She walked away quickly, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed until she reached the privacy of the servants' stairwell. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. She knew his place. She knew her place. And apparently, those places were as far apart as they had ever been, despite promises whispered in darkness, despite love declared and consummated. She made her way to her small room, closed the door, and sat on her narrow bed. Her hands were steady as she pulled out her traveling bag and began to pack. She folded her dresses with mechanical precision, arranged her few belongings with care. From the bottom drawer she retrieved the wooden box containing her brother's letters and her mother's silver brooch. She wrote a note to Mrs. Pembroke, keeping it brief and professional. Family circumstances require my immediate departure. I apologize for the short notice. Thank you for the opportunity to serve at Riverside Hall." Then she wrote a second note, this one more difficult. Her hand trembled as she addressed it simply. "Thomas, I prefer truth spoken at the window's edge to lies beneath crystal chandeliers. You promised to stop being a coward, but when tested, you chose reputation over recognition, propriety over promise. I do not fault you for the choice. Perhaps it is the wiser path. But I cannot remain where what I am to you must be hidden, denied, reduced to nothing more than employment. I am going to my aunt's boarding house in Farmville, where I will assist with her dressmaking business. I will send for my remaining belongings once I am settled. I wish you well, Thomas. I hope you find the courage to live honestly, even if it is not with me. Yours in truth, if not in practice, Elizabeth." She left the note on the small writing desk in her room, shouldered her bag, and descended the servants' stairs one final time. The morning had grown bright and warm, mocking the coldness in her chest. She did not look back at Riverside Hall as she walked down the drive toward the main road, where she could catch the afternoon coach to Farmville. She did not let herself cry, though her eyes burned and her throat ached with suppressed sobs. She had learned long ago that survival required moving forward, even when everything in you wanted to stay. She had survived her mother's death, her brother's illness, poverty, and uncertainty. She would survive this heartbreak too. But as the elegant white columns of Riverside Hall disappeared behind the turning of the road, Elizabeth could not deny the truth. Something essential had broken inside her, something that might never fully heal. Behind her, in his study, Thomas finally dismissed the investors with cold courtesy. The moment they were gone, he strode through the house looking for Elizabeth, his heart pounding with dread and remorse. He needed to explain, to apologize, to make her understand that the words meant nothing, that only his private promises mattered. But when he reached her room and found it empty, the traveling bag gone, the note waiting on the desk with his name written in her careful script, he knew with sickening certainty that he had lost her. He read her words once, twice, a third time, each reading driving the knife deeper. Truth spoken at the window's edge. He had promised to stop being a coward, and at the first real test he had failed her utterly. Thomas sat on her narrow bed, the note crumpled in his fist, and for the first time in 10 years, he wept. Not for his sister, though grief for Caroline was woven through everything. Not for himself, though the pain in his chest felt unbearable. He wept for Elizabeth, for what he had done to her, for the courage she had shown and the cowardice he had displayed. When the tears finally stopped, he stood, his jaw set with new determination. He had made a mistake, perhaps the worst of his life, but he would not compound it by accepting defeat. If Elizabeth preferred truth to lies, then he would give her truth. If she needed courage, he would find it, and if she required public recognition of what she meant to him, he would shout it from the highest roof in Virginia. He had lost her once through fear. He would not lose her again. Thomas Ashford left Riverside Hall that afternoon, with a single purpose burning in his chest, to find the woman he loved and prove himself worthy of the second chance he probably did not deserve, but would fight for with every breath in his body. The boarding house in Farmville sat at the edge of town, a modest 2-story building with peeling paint and flower boxes that Elizabeth's Aunt Clara tended with fierce determination. It was nothing like Riverside Hall, but it was honest work in an honest place, and Elizabeth threw herself into it with the same dedication she had brought to every task in her life. For 3 days, she helped her aunt with alterations and fittings, managed the household accounts and tried not to think about grey eyes and strong hands and promises made in lamplight. She told herself she had made the right choice, that dignity mattered more than love, that she could not build a life on words spoken in private and denied in public. But at night, lying in the small room under the eaves, she pressed her hand to her chest and felt the ache where her heart used to be. On the 4th day, Elizabeth was in the back garden hanging linens to dry when her aunt appeared in the doorway, an odd expression on her weathered face. "Elizabeth, dear, you have a visitor." Elizabeth's heart lurched. "Who? See for yourself." Aunt Clara's eyes held something that might have been approval or amusement or both. "He is waiting in the front parlor, though I told him it was not proper to receive gentlemen callers without a chaperone. He said he would wait all day if necessary." Elizabeth's hands trembled as she unpinned the last sheet. She smoothed her dress, one of her aunt's cast-offs, plain brown cotton, and tried to calm her racing pulse. It could not be Thomas. He would not come here. He had made his choice. But when she entered the small parlor, there he stood by the window, still dressed in traveling clothes, dusty from the road, his dark hair wind-blown, his face showing lines of strain and sleeplessness. When he turned and their eyes met, Elizabeth saw such raw emotion in his expression that she had to grip the doorframe for support. Elizabeth. Her name was a prayer, a plea, an apology all at once. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Coming after the only thing that matters." He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if uncertain of his welcome. "I read your letter." "Then you understand why I left." "I understand that I failed you." Thomas's hands clenched at his sides. "I understand that when I was tested, I chose the easy path over the right one. I understand that I hurt you in the worst possible way, by making you feel that what we shared was shameful, or had to be hidden. It does have to be hidden." Elizabeth forced the words out. "You said so yourself. The investors, the business relationships, the scandal. Damn the investors." Thomas's voice was fierce, louder than she had ever heard it. "Damn the business and the scandal, and every person who thinks they have a right to judge how I live my life or who I love." Elizabeth's breath caught. "You cannot mean that. I mean every word." He moved closer now, closing the distance between them with purpose. "After you left, I sat in that empty house and realized something. I have spent 10 years protecting myself from loss by refusing to truly live. I built walls and called it strength. I chose isolation and called it safety. But you, Elizabeth, you showed me what courage actually looks like. Thomas, no, let me finish." His gray eyes burned with intensity. "You walked into my life and refused to be invisible. You challenged me, matched me, made me feel things I thought I had buried forever. And when I betrayed you, when I reduced what we had to mere employment to appease men whose opinions mean nothing, you did not beg or plead. You simply left with your dignity intact and your truth spoken clearly. I had no choice. You had every choice. You could have stayed, accepted the scraps I was offering, settled for being my secret. But you valued yourself too much for that. And in doing so, you taught me to value what we have together more than anything else." Tears burned in Elizabeth's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I was wrong." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Before I came here, I went to every investor, every business partner, every person whose opinion I once thought mattered. I told them the truth, that I am in love with a woman of extraordinary intelligence and strength, that I intend to marry her, and that anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere." Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. "Thomas, you could lose everything." "I already lost everything the moment you walked out that door." He unfolded the paper. 3 investors withdrew their partnerships. Patterson threatened to spread rumors. But 5 others congratulated me and said it was about time I rejoined the living. And you know what I realized? The ones who left were men whose approval I never truly needed. The business will survive. I will survive. But I cannot survive without you. He held out the paper. It was a withdrawal notice from all social organizations, a formal statement of his intention to marry outside acceptable society norms, a complete abandonment of everything he had spent years building in terms of reputation and position. "You threw it all away," Elizabeth whispered. "No." Thomas closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I threw away the things that did not matter to make room for the only thing that does. You, Elizabeth, your truth, your strength, your love. That is what I want. That is what I choose. But what if people talk? They will. What if we face difficulties? We will face them together. What if I make mistakes again? You will call me on them, and I will do better." His grip on her hands tightened. "I am not offering you an easy life, Elizabeth. I am offering you an honest one, a life where you are seen, valued, celebrated. A life where I stand beside you in daylight and declare to anyone who will listen that you are my equal, my partner, my love." Elizabeth felt tears streaming down her face. "I want to believe you. Then believe this. Thomas released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold ring. It was old, worn smooth with age, clearly a family piece. This was my grandmother's. She was a seamstress who married a lumber mill owner when such marriages were even more scandalous than they are now. They built a life together despite opposition, and their love lasted 50 years. I want that with you. He did not kneel. Instead, he stood before her, meeting her eyes as an equal, holding the ring between them. Elizabeth Brennan, I love you with everything I am. I love your fire and your gentleness, your strength and your vulnerability. I love the way you refuse to be diminished, the way you speak truth even when it costs you, the way you made my cold house feel like a home. Will you marry me? Not in secret, not in shame, but in front of everyone who matters and many who do not. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of the gift you are offering? Elizabeth looked at the ring, at his face, at the hope and fear and love written so clearly in his expression. She thought of all the reasons to say no, all the difficulties they would face, all the ways this could end badly. Then she thought of the alternative, a life of safety without passion, of survival without love, of dignity purchased at the cost of joy. Yes, the word emerged strong and clear. Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. Relief and joy transformed his face. He slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on just as fiercely, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth, the rightness. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I will not fail you again. You will, Elizabeth said with a watery laugh. We will both fail each other sometimes, but we will do it honestly, and we will forgive each other and move forward. Together. Together. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. Aunt Clara appeared in the doorway, her expression torn between disapproval of the impropriety and satisfaction at the outcome. I suppose you will be wanting to borrow my front parlor for the wedding. If you would allow it, Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Elizabeth. I want to marry her as soon as possible. Unless Elizabeth prefers something more formal. Elizabeth shook her head. Here is perfect, simple and honest with people who matter. Then here it shall be. Thomas tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar and tender that Elizabeth's heart swelled. And after we will return to Riverside Hall, but it will be different this time. You will not be staff. You will be mistress of the house, my wife, my equal in all things. What about Mrs. Pembroke? A wry smile touched his lips. Mrs. Pembroke will adjust or she will retire with a generous pension. The choice is hers. They spent the afternoon planning, talking, rebuilding trust through honest conversation. Thomas told her about the investors who had withdrawn, about his decision to prioritize personal happiness over business expansion, about his plans to present her at the next county gathering, not as a scandal to be weathered, but as his choice to be celebrated. Elizabeth told him about her fears, about the money needed for Samuel's continued treatment, about her determination to maintain her dignity even if it meant facing social censure. Thomas listened without interruption, then quietly informed her that he had already arranged for Samuel to receive the best possible care, that the costs were handled, that her brother would want for nothing. You did not need to do that, Elizabeth said. I know, but I wanted to. Your family is now my family. Your burdens are now our burdens, shared and lighter for it. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Aunt Clara's small parlor, with the rector from the local church officiating. Samuel attended, having been brought from the sanatorium for the occasion, thin but smiling, his eyes bright with joy for his sister. A handful of Thomas's workers came, the ones who had known him longest and understood that love mattered more than status. Mrs. Pembroke did not attend, but she sent a stiff note of congratulation that suggested she was adjusting to the new reality, if not entirely approving of it. Elizabeth wore a dress of cream silk that Aunt Clara had helped her sew, simple but elegant. Thomas wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When he slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger again, this time in front of witnesses and God, Elizabeth felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of rightness, of home, of belonging. They returned to Riverside Hall as husband and wife, and Thomas was true to his word. He introduced her to everyone they encountered as his wife and partner. When they attended the next county gathering, he kept her hand in his throughout the evening, danced only with her, and made it clear through word and action that she was his choice and his pride. Some people whispered, some relationships cooled, but others warmed, surprising them both. The rector's wife called to welcome Elizabeth. Several of Thomas's business associates sent congratulations, and slowly, carefully, a new social circle formed around them. Smaller than the old one, perhaps, but built on acceptance rather than judgment. Riverside Hall itself transformed. Music filled the rooms regularly now, sometimes Elizabeth playing, sometimes Thomas, often both together. The heavy drapes stayed open, letting sunlight flood the spaces. Flowers appeared in every room, bright spots of color and life. The house breathed differently, moved differently, felt different. One evening, several months after their wedding, Elizabeth and Thomas sat on the porch watching the river turn gold in the sunset. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. They had spent the afternoon reading together in the library, comfortable in companionable silence. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked quietly. Elizabeth considered the question seriously. They had faced difficulties, some social ostracism, some business setbacks, some moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, they had faced everything together, with honesty and love. "Yes," she said finally, "not because everything is easy or perfect, but because everything is real. Because I can be myself with you and you can be yourself with me, and we do not have to hide or pretend or diminish what we feel." Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That is all I ever wanted. To be known and loved anyway. You are known." Elizabeth turned to look up at him. "Every stubborn, controlled, secretly tender part of you. And you are loved beyond measure. As are you." He cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes warm with emotion. "You saved me, Elizabeth. From loneliness, from cowardice, from a half-life disguised as safety. You made me brave." "We made each other brave," Elizabeth corrected. "That is what love does." They sat together as the sun set completely, and the first stars emerged, the river flowing steady and constant below them. Inside Riverside Hall, lamps would soon be lit. Supper would be served. The evening routine would unfold. But it was a routine born of care now, not mere habit. A life chosen rather than endured. And in the years that followed, when people spoke of Thomas and Elizabeth Ashford, they spoke of a love that had overcome propriety and expectation. They spoke of a house that had learned to laugh, a man who had learned to feel, and a woman who had refused to be invisible. They spoke of courage and honesty, and the transformative power of choosing love over fear. But Thomas and Elizabeth did not need anyone to tell their story. They lived it every day in small moments and grand gestures, in challenges met together, and joys shared openly. They lived it in the music that filled their home, the flowers that graced their tables, the laughter that echoed through rooms once kept silent. They lived it in the truth they had fought for and won. That love, when chosen with courage and honored with honesty, could indeed change everything. Some transformations happen in an instant, a single decision that changes everything. But the truest transformations unfold slowly, in the quiet accumulation of courage chosen over comfort, truth spoken over silence kept, love declared over fear maintained. Thomas and Elizabeth learned that love is not about perfection, but about showing up honestly, even when it costs everything. They discovered that the walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prisons that confine us, and that real freedom comes not from avoiding pain, but from choosing connection despite it. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to hide who we are and what we feel. That dignity is not found in conforming to others' expectations, but in honoring our own truth. That a life lived authentically, even if it comes with struggle, is infinitely richer than a life of comfortable pretense. Perhaps the question is not whether we will face difficult choices between safety and authenticity, between what is expected and what is true. The question is, when that moment comes, will we have the courage to choose love over fear? Will we speak our truth even when our voice shakes? Will we stand beside the people who matter in daylight without apology? Thomas and Elizabeth would tell you, yes, always yes, because that is how houses become homes, how silence becomes music, and how two guarded hearts learn to beat as one. If this story touched your heart, I would be deeply grateful if you would leave a like. It helps others discover stories about courage and love. Please subscribe so you never miss a story that might speak to your own journey. And I would love to know, where are you listening from? What part of Thomas and Elizabeth's story resonated most with you? Your comments mean the world and help build this community of people who believe in the transformative power of honest love. Thank you for spending this time at Riverside Hall. May you find your own courage to live authentically and love without apology.